Welcome to another exciting episode of the Collect and Destroy podcast. I'm your host, the Baxter of Puppets. This week we have a very special double feature episode for you in which we'll be digging into two of the greatest horror comedy films of all time. First, we're starting out with the 1984 holiday classic, Gremlins, and the second being the 1990 big city sequel, Gremlins 2, The New Batch. My special guest today is the host of the wildly popular podcast, Wrestling Public Radio. She returns to the show today to give us her insights on gizmos, gadgets, and microwave cooking shows. Crystal Schmidt, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much for having me back. I appreciate it so much.
So how have the holidays been treating you?
The holidays have been all right. It's, just middle of pandemic vibes. So there's not a lot of travel planning or anything like that, like normal. It's kind of nice in that regard to not be like feeling the entire stress of the logistics of that. But it is also a little bit sad to not get to spend any holidays with anybody except you, which is a treat.
How much more can you ask for? So how's the podcast going?
Podcast is coming along okay. It's a lot of work. And
you don't say.
It's a lot more work than I had initially thought it was going to be. Doing something just by myself, especially, there's a lot of thought that goes into every episode that I do. There's a lot of research that goes into it. So it's a lot of working hours that don't end up in the recorded version. You have just like several hours of research that's done on top of taking your notes and then transcribing those notes into an actual script for a story that you're telling about somebody, and you want to do it justice. So it's one of those things where you're just like, you have to like fully focus on it. And oftentimes I don't have that luxury to just pour a ton of time into it, just because even though we're not doing as much outside of the house, we're still trying to get a lot done inside of the house, and meal planning is rough, and then keeping the house clean and organized. We're trying to organize even more stuff so that once people can come visit again, we have an organized house. And on top of that, I am also trying to get my real estate sales license. So I've been doing coursework for that, which is a big undertaking too. Kind of takes a little bit away from the podcast, but I'm still getting episodes out there. I'm still working on scripts, and we'll be recording another episode hopefully soon between now and New Year's.
What's the next one going to be about?
The next episode is going to be about one of my faves. It is Junkyard Dog. He's an old school wrestler. He has kind of a gimmick that's a little bit like, wouldn't fly today necessarily. But it's something that like he was just such a captivating character and wrestler that no matter what position he played as a wrestler, whether it was a face or a heel, he would reel you in and get you to be a fan.
Cannot wait. I've enjoyed all the episodes up until this point, so keep at it. Good luck with the real estate. Let's get things started though. The main reason that we are here today is Gremlins 1 and 2. So I'll start out talking, giving a brief synopsis of the first film. We'll talk about the first film a bit, and then we'll move on to the second. Gremlins, the original movie, was released on June 8th, 1984. In this film, we follow a gadget salesman named Rand Peltzer. He's looking for a special gift for his son. That was an interesting sound.
Yeah, that was weird. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay.
All right, well, we'll take it from the top there. Speaking of Gremlins.
That wasn't
so Gremlins was released on June 8th, 1984. A gadget salesman named Rand Peltzer is looking for a special gift for his son, Billy, and finds one at a store in Chinatown. The shopkeeper is reluctant to sell him the Mogwai, but sells it to him with the warning to never expose him to bright light, water, or to feed him after midnight. All of this happens, and the result is a gang of gremlins that decide to tear up the small town of Kingston Falls on Christmas Eve. So with that being said, when did you first see Gremlins, and what are your earliest memories of the film?
So, as somebody who is relatively on the young side of the spectrum of 80s memories, I didn't watch Gremlins until I was quite a bit older, probably like middle or high school. However, I think I've been aware of Gremlins, specifically Gizmo, for my entire life, or as much of it as I can remember. It's just kind of been like a constant that's always been around. You see it in pop culture so much when I was growing up that it just kind of was like second nature. They were always there.
Yeah, I would say the same. Like, since this came out in 1984, I was only 2 when it came out. So, it's always been a part of my life. It's always been a movie that's been out there. And I just remember that, like, seeing it, it was like, oh, this is like a harmless movie. But I also, as like a little kid, the Gremlins were terrifying. Like, they were definitely very scary creatures. But the movie was never really like a horror movie.
Yeah, I think that's a common thing for people who were kind of young when Gremlins came out, or were exposed to them at a very young age. Is like, a friend of mine has a podcast. Shout out to the Stokes County boys. But they really want to do an episode about Gremlins, and the counterpart host on the show is just like, I won't do it. I won't watch that movie. I'm scarred by those characters. The little gremlins are creepy. So they're having a struggle over there. I hope you all figured it out.
I think it's like one of those good movies for maybe like an intro to horror for like kids, because there's enough balance where, like, it's like, oh, there's a cute little gizmo, like, he's cute. All those guys are scary, but look at the cute guy, and I think that it gives you some reprieve from just scary stuff. And plus they're like zany. They're kind of cartoony.
Right. Yeah, I definitely, when I was a little kid, I feel like I had much bigger fish to fry in the horror genre. Like, I was scared of Candyman because that was something I saw like way too early. And so I was like, no, I'm not scared of these little green guys. Like, I understand where they come from. I don't understand where this Candyman comes from, but I'm scared to use public restrooms now.
So let's talk a little bit about the origins of the film. The story was conceived by Chris Columbus. His inspiration came from his loft, when at night it would sound like a platoon of mice would come out and be skittering around. Living in River West, I feel like I can also attest to this, a feeling of like, where are those mice? Like, I hear them, but I don't see them. I did one time find a mouse trying to take like a tiny little Snickers bar down a hole that it didn't fit through, like still in the wrapper. So I can see how you could maybe think that maybe those are gremlins and start brainstorming that concept. So I know he started to write some of these ideas down.
For sure. So on top of that, the script for the Gremlins movie was actually just a spec script. It was something to show potential employers that Chris Columbus would show that he had writing abilities. It wasn't something that was ever supposed to actually be filmed. But then Steven Spielberg, who had a production company, was like, I'm interested and we should turn this into a film. Spielberg later explained this is one of the most original things that he's come across in so many years. And that's why he decided to buy the script in the end.
Well, and you get that Steven Spielberg endorsement, like you're going places, kid. Like
Yeah,
it was
flattering.
great, and the timing was good. Like the whole like horror comedy genre was really big at the time, and actually like Ghostbusters came out the same weekend. And for me and a lot of people I know, the 80s is like a heyday of films. There's this thing where there's all these great horror comedies coming out. There's also these like serious horror movies coming out. There was just something about the cinema experience at that time. Um, but the notion of Gremlins goes all the way back to uh, World War II, where the Royal Air Force, they would say that the failures, mechanical failures in the planes, were like these little gremlins that were running around. Um, and there's
Yeah,
actually
basically just as like a way to like deflect blame. It's like them pointing fingers, but at nobody.
well, and I like how that concept. We'll talk about it later, but it kind of gets pulled into the film itself. Um, uh, when I'm sorry, Murray Flutterman, he's commenting like about the foreign vehicles and stuff like that, and that there's gremlins in there, and that goes back to him being in the war. And Roald Dahl, who was actually a lieutenant, I believe, a flight lieutenant in the RAF, he wrote a book called The Gremlins, which Walt Disney almost turned into a film itself.
Um, yeah, so the Gremlins, like they were depicted throughout all sorts of cartoons. There were lots of like posters and stuff that were made with Gremlins. Um, and basically I'm sorry, I like have totally lost my train of thought on this. So you can just carry on right here. I'm like not even.
Basically, though, like gremlins were showing up in pop culture all over the place. So even like there's a very famous Warner Brothers cartoon with Bugs Bunny where he's battling. It's called Falling Hair. He's battling a gremlin on an airplane. And the thing to note that there's all these pop culture references for gremlins that had happened up until this point. But Joe Dante really tried to separate himself from that towards the making of the film. Kind of saying, our gremlins are somewhat different. They're sort of green and they have big mouths and they smile a lot and they do incredibly nasty things to people and they enjoy it all the while. So when it comes to the actual, casting in the film, I think that's where most successful films really knock it out of the park. And this one, is one of those such films. Starting with Hoyt Axton playing Randall Rand Peltzer. Peltzer's the name. Rand Peltzer. Rand is the father of Billy. He's the husband of Lynn, and that's kind of where our story starts, with him in Chinatown going to find a gift for Billy.
Right. And well, Hoyt Axton actually was also a really popular folk music writer and singer through like American culture. And
Huh.
I would say that that's probably what he was maybe more known for, is actually his singing abilities. I mean, he's like in other stuff as well, obviously. However, he definitely had more of a career and is like he's got a lasting legacy for his songwriting abilities, and maybe
Sure.
his songs are more well known because so many of them have been covered by other people. I would say the most poignant for right now, like this time of year, would be his song "Joy to the World," which was something that he wrote but was made very popular by Three Dog Night when they did a cover of it. We like just saw it in a commercial today, as we were sitting on the couch, like right after we talked about him being a musician, which is really fascinating to me. Is like this guy created music that is so timeless.
Yeah, and it's always cool to see people like transcend what they're known for, whether it's a musician becoming an actor becoming a musician. There tends to be this thing where like actors want to be musicians, musicians want to be actors. It's just a very interesting like grass is greener kind of scenario. And once you have that fame and that money, um, so he heads down to Chinatown and he's looking for a gift. Um, he he finds this little shop. He's kind of trying to sling around some of his own inventions when he's in there, and he meets a gentleman by the name of Mr. Wing.
Yeah, Mr. Wing, I find it very amusing that when Rand shows up, he is trying to actually sell one of his inventions to Mr. Wing. He's kind of like, showing him his little bathroom buddy. And this is just the first of a huge list of sad inventions that Rand Peltzer has tried to come up with and get patented and have somebody invest in his creativity, if you want to call it that.
So the actor Key Luke, you were telling me he's had some big roles before this movie, right?
Oh yeah. So Key Luke actually was one of the founding members of the Screen Actors Guild. He's got like 225 acting credits on IMDb. I was like really blown away when I was looking into his history in Hollywood. He was the original Kato in the Green Hornet, like little serial movies that they used to do in like 1939 through 1941, which was kind of astounding to know that that's kind of like an iconic character to play. He also did the voice of Brack in the 60s version of the Space Ghost
Oh
animated
wow,
series,
yeah.
which is really cool for like nerds around my age who would have been watching Cartoon Network, the like newer ones much later down the road. But to know that like this dude who played the grandpa in the original both Gremlins movies that we're talking about today, was really, it was a little treat.
So Lynn Lee McCain plays Lynn Peltzer, which is Rand's wife. She's Billy's mom. And even though Rand's like not very successful and struggling kind of with his job, she's very supportive. She's kind of like that classic 80s movie mom, I would say. Um, but I really enjoy, she's got that showdown with the gremlins at one point where, she throws one in a blender, she stabs one to death, sprays one with flea and tick spray. Like it's just like this ultimate battle. And she holds her own. And I think she does a great job.
Yeah, when I was taking notes throughout the first movie, all I remember writing down about Mrs. Peltzer is that she had a kill streak going. Like this lady was on a tear. She didn't look like she knew what she was about to be doing. Like as she was carrying the knife with like the blade up, like she kind of looked a little silly. Like you're not ready to stab anything, and then all of a sudden she was like, "I'm killing all of you." I was impressed.
I think that the casting of Phoebe Cates as Kate and Kate Berenger and Zach Galligan as Billy Peltzer, like what great, like innocent, relatable teenagers. You can't help but like these kids. You can't help but root for these kids. Billy is the one who is gifted Gizmo the Mogwai, and they just put in really authentic performances throughout the movie. They're kind of terrorized by Polly Holliday's character Ruby Deagle, who she run the bank. Is that right?
Yeah, it seemed like that's how it seemed to me. I guess I could have like looked a little bit further into what exactly her role was within the financial institution in the town, but she definitely carried a certain elitism about her that would symbolize that she's like the wealthiest person in town and she controls where the money comes from and goes.
Yeah, I like that the setting, other than the Chinatown sequence, is all about this small town. So it's kind of like this contained event.
Yeah.
And like you said, like Ms. Deagle, she's like the only wealthy person in the movie.
Hmm.
And she's portrayed just like wicked, like just like this wicked witch character. She wants to put the dog down, throw him in the dryer on spin cycle, and just like all these dark things. So when you see her go in the film, when you have the gremlins outside caroling to distract her and she doesn't have her red wig on, and then another gremlin sneaks in and sets her chair off to really ultimately shoot her out of her house out onto the front lawn where she dies from the impact. Like pretty brutal, but you like don't feel bad for her.
Yeah. Something I find amazing about Polly Holiday, that is an attachment to something that you and I recently watched, is that Polly Holiday plays Jill's mom in Home Improvement.
What?
Yes, which is weird because we haven't really watched Home Improvement in a really long time, like since we were kids. But we decided on a whim to record the holiday episodes that CMT's been playing. So we watched this episode recently where Jill's parents come to visit and they're fighting. And I was like, I can't not bring this up to you now because
Holy
what a
crap.
surprise.
Yeah, that's amazing. There's some smaller characters in the movie that are worth noting, though. Judge Reinhold, who's like an '80s staple and everything from Beverly Hills Cop to Fast Times. Um,
He was in Fast Times with Phoebe Cates too.
very true. Yep. And
They're
then
like,
his boss is played by Edward Andrews, who was the grandpa in 16 Candles. He plays Roland Corbin, and they kind of have a relationship. This working boss, Gerald Judge's character is like just very opportunistic and like snooty kind of, and just kind of a weaselly character, but like an '80s staple character as well. And anytime you add Judge Reinhold to something, it automatically just gives it that like that classic feel of so many of those movies of the time.
right. So we also had a character who is a fan favorite, Murray Futterman, who was played by Dick Miller.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
Murray and his wife Sheila, residents of the town of Kingston Falls, they're neighbors of the Peltzer family. And Murray happens to be a veteran from the Second World War. He's well known for his paranoia of foreign objects and vehicles, as we discussed. That was like a thing of the time, was blaming everything on these little gremlins getting into all your stuff and ruining things. And he had actually warned Billy and Kate to watch out for that kind of stuff because they had gremlins that were planted inside. And he like makes a comment about the same gremlins that brought down our planes in the big one, referring to World War II. So it's like, you just have like that guy in town where you're like, nobody really believes in what he's talking about. Um, but it happened that he was right the whole time.
Yeah, I think it's one of those characters too. Like throughout the film, you're kind of feeling him out. Like you're like, okay, is this like a nasty guy? Is he the town drunk? Like you can't really, but then he becomes like a very endearing character, and you see even much more of that in the second movie. Like you
Right.
much more embrace him as like almost like a family member at that point. But what a great actor and a great role for him to play. Another '80s staple we have, of course, is Corey Feldman showing up in this movie wearing a Christmas tree costume.
Oh, Corey Feldman was really cute in this film. He was Billy's like little friend. I wouldn't say that that they were close in age necessarily. It kind of seemed like he was like a little kid from the neighborhood that would come and hang around with you and the gang in the neighborhood, and he just kind of palled along. He has a voluntary job of bringing Christmas trees to the Kingston Falls residents, and he is actually the person who accidentally spills some water on our little friend Gizmo. And that leads to spawning of 5 new little Mogwai, among them being Stripe, who's kind of a bad guy. I feel bad for Pete,
I don't. He didn't even care. He's like, oh well. He's like, oh, can I get one of those? And then he makes a bunch, and he doesn't even take one with him. You'd think that he would at least be like, oh, can I take one? Instead, he's like, oh, look at this comic book. Our friend Jonathan Banks shows up in this movie. He's the cop in the police office that's got the candy cane in his mouth, and he could really care less. He just looks like this Weasley loser cop, and I'm like, man, that guy looks familiar. And you just kind of have that feeling, and then you realize that he's Mike from Breaking Bad, the bald baddie.
Yeah, he definitely grew into being a favorite of our generation through his work on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. He is such a treat as he's gotten older.
Well, what's funny about that with Better Call Saul is after Breaking Bad, I think he kind of figured he had like peaked, like that was the ultimate role, and he said he was going to retire from acting. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden they announced they're going to do Better Call Saul, and now he's like one of the main characters of that show.
Right. Well, and he also was in El Camino, the movie about
yep.
Bad, like what happens after.
Yeah.
So, you just can't say no to a role like that. It's so iconic, and I feel like as long as this dude's alive, they really got to try to work him into as much stuff as they can for that series and any spin-offs that it conjures up. He really makes those shows so much more enjoyable. I don't know if Jonathan Banks is a fan of Collect and Destroy, but if you're listening, I'm a really big fan, man.
Yeah, talk about casting again. Vince Gilligan with the casting of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and a lot of the actors that he pulled into Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul all came from the X-Files, which he worked on prior to launching his own big career. I want to give a shout out at this moment to who I think the real star of the movie is, which is
important casting.
Mushroom the dog, who plays the character Barney. He shows up at a very prime moment at the end of the movie to help Gizmo save the day. What an adorable rascal this dog is.
Kind of an unsung hero.
Yeah, just like a lot of personality, and I just think sometimes that the animals don't get enough credit for their role in the films.
I actually I came across a tweet from Zach Galligan from like 2013 or something as I was doing a little research on the movie, and he mentioned his pal Mushroom the dog and how they got that dog to do everything with treats. Like the treats were the answer. Like anytime that dog was like looking perky was treats. So, I mean, honestly, if anybody has dogs and you're trying to get into like dog acting, I heard it's all about the treats.
Another set of actors that often don't get enough credit, but have built up so much of our childhoods are the voice actors. So in this movie, you think like, what were they doing voice actors for? But Gizmo actually did have a voice. Gizmo did have some lines, as well as the Gremlins. You've got Howie Mandel. You're a big Howie Mandel fan. Maybe you should intro Howie, and I'll talk about Frank.
Am I a big Howie Mandel fan suddenly?
Yeah, you're always trying to give me like fist bumps and stuff. And
the thing about Howie Mandel, the thing about Howie Mandel is that I've never had to shake his hand because he won't do it. Which is something I can really appreciate, especially now that we're in the middle of a pandemic. He was before his time and we didn't know it. So everybody was giving him crap, but for no good reason. Um, Howie Mandel has participated in bringing to life many things from my childhood. Like, I would say two huge things in particular, aside from being the voice of Gizmo, is that he created Bobby's World, which was an animated series from when I was a little kid
Excellent.
that I used to watch all the time. He did the voice of Bobby himself. He did the voice of Bobby's dad, and he was like a producer. He created it. He wrote everything. So it's pretty iconic to be participating in. But on top of that, another one of my favorite shows when I was a little kid was Muppet Babies. And he did the voice of Skeeter, Animal, and Bunsen in Muppet Babies.
Wow.
So, you look at Howie Mandel, you think about Howie Mandel doing, what was that show that he, Deal or No Deal? Is that what he ended up doing?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
You think about like the way that he talks on that show. If you've ever heard him do interviews and stuff, you don't really think about this guy having some kind of like elementary voice to him, but apparently it all sits in there somewhere. And it's really, really good. He did a great job on all of those pieces of work.
Yeah, it's weird how celebrities often they'll be in the background kind of doing a lot of great things. But then they'll slip and trip and land in like some position that makes them America's favorite game show host or something like that. Howie Mandel went from Deal or No Deal, which is my favorite slot machine in Vegas. He went from Deal or No Deal to America's Got Talent. Like, he's just like one of these iconic American characters now, where before he was like a comedian, stand-up comedian, voice actor, whatnot. Speaking of childhood heroes, though, Frank Welker, who does the voice of Stripe, he was Megatron, Galvatron, Soundwave, all from the Transformers. Fred Jones and Scooby Doo. Like, we actually just recently
Scooby as well.
What?
Scooby as well.
Oh, geez. We recently just saw him on a panel for HasCon for Hasbro, talking about the new Transformers series and stuff. But like, you just realize how much of your childhood these people have created behind the scenes, and you never necessarily put a face to a name to a character even. So in my adult life, there's much more recognition for what it takes to create characters that are long lasting, and people have devoted their entire lives to this.
Well, and as people who are so nostalgic for things that we grew up watching on TV and in movies, once you get to an age where you start recognizing voices or techniques, or you know people's names, especially like voice actors don't get a lot of recognition because you don't see their face and everything.
Yep.
So unless you're able to like pick out their voice specifically, like they have some kind of like a unique characteristic, you don't necessarily give them the credit that's due to them for being in so many things. And Frank Welker is in everything. Like, I want to be dead serious with everybody right now. If you have ever heard in an animated TV show or a movie, you heard some kind of like an animal making noise, you heard, oh, there was a girl, Corn Chip Girl from Recess. This is like real deep stuff right now. Corn Chip Girl from Recess. There's an episode with Corn Chip Girl. She actually is a werewolf who's trying to get everybody to eat these corn chips so that they turn into werewolves too. When she's the werewolf, who do you think makes that noise? It's not the cute little girl who is making her regular voice. It's Frank Welker is the Corn Chip Girl as a werewolf. Like, he does everything, and he's so good at it. The man is versatile. If you thought I was a fan of Howie Mandel, I don't know where Baxter got this idea from, but I'm a
probably the bald cap you wear and the fist bumps.
No,
so let's get into the filming. Let's get into the filming a little bit of this movie. They've got this great screenplay written by Chris Columbus. And Steven Spielberg's looking for somebody to direct this. Again, horror comedy is kind of the thing they're looking for. So they go to a director who has had some great success, recent success with horror comedies, which is Joe Dante. He directed The Howling in 1981, 1979. Before that, he actually directed Rock and Roll High School, which is the movie famous because it's like the Ramones movie. They're in the movie. Great song as well. But they definitely made some good decisions to make sure that the right people were at the helm of this movie.
Actually, Murray from Gremlins, the actor who played him, was actually in The Howling, which was directed by Joe Dante, which is, I always find that so it's such a treat when you see people who work together on multiple projects. I get really excited about stuff like that. Moving beyond that, during filming, one thing that was utilized was a famous urban legend that was referenced in the film. Kate Berenger, Billy's girlfriend, reveals in this very strange monologue, you get this all of a sudden it's just her. It's very focused on only being her. She kind of removes herself from the situation. It's like she's in a different dimension almost, and she's going into this story that's really morbid and serious, and I don't know, not set up for the time that we're in. The situation, it's not very good. So she starts to talk about her father died at Christmas when he dressed up as Santa Claus and broke his neck while climbing down the family's chimney, which is one of those things where you're like, I didn't see this coming. But here we are. I guess we're going down this road. It didn't feel right, but also it's one of those things where looking back, when you go down the road and you watch it again, you're like, this is one of the most memorable moments in the film.
Yeah, and what I think is weird about that is after I saw the movie, I'm like, that sounds like an urban legend.
Sure enough.
And then I find out it is an urban legend. I just was first exposed to it because of watching this movie. I didn't know that it was something people had actually talked about. And from that perspective, it almost feels like you said, it feels like it's not part of the movie, it's outside of it. It almost feels parody, it's some sort of Saturday Night Live thing or something, because but the movie is serious.
Yes.
So you take the story for face value, oh my God, this is why Christmas isn't a good time for her. Oh, I guess that's something that we should.
She leads into it by talking about how much she hates Christmas, but she hates Christmas, but she does like the idea of going on a date with Billy. We crossed that bridge at the same time, but she really, if they just started dating and she's just I'm going to offer this up. Here's my trauma.
Well, he's got to know what he's getting into,
I guess.
So that's probably, that's a pretty good moment in the movie. There's so many classic moments though, in which we would, some of our favorites, I guess. I think we should talk a little bit about those. I would start with the beginning of the movie, at that beginning scene with Rand, going to that Chinatown shop. It's got this very mystical classic 80s vibe to it. A lot of movies around this time had to do with Chinatown or Asian culture or Asian mystics. And things that come to mind are the Kumite for Bloodsport. It's this down this alley hidden thing in China, and then you have the movie Big Trouble in Little China, which all takes place in Chinatown, and it just kind of establishes the tone for the movie. And right away, like that's the kind of stuff that as a kid, very reminiscent of a Spielberg vibe, where you're transported as the viewer to feel like you are in that little dark place. Like the lighting is very dim, like you feel it's like watching an Indiana Jones movie. You feel like you're there with the characters and experiencing it for the first time. And especially as a kid, it's much easier to suspend your disbelief and just be like, yes, this is actually happening.
Well, in this scene, it sets up the theme of like the lesson you're supposed to learn is you have small town people dealing with big city things. Like this is not something that the people of Kingston Falls were at all prepared for, but it was something that like the grandpa in the shop was just like, yeah, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. That's the way it is. And obviously, like he had no trouble with Gizmo, the Mogwai, like because you follow the rules, you stick to it. But this small town guy, just he wasn't ready for that responsibility.
And he even refused to sell it to him. He even refused to sell Gizmo to
him. So I think what you're trying to say is that he didn't actually sell Gizmo to Rand, which is definitely that's like a problematic thing, is that Rand ended up with this Mogwai because some little kid was like, no, we actually really do need the money. So I'm going to like meet you out in the alley and I'm going to secretly give you this anyway if you give me some money.
He did not care what the consequences were.
Yep. A favorite moment of mine that we kind of touched on a little bit when we were talking about Corey Feldman being in this movie is that Pete, the little friend, was so excited when when he met Gizmo, and they were like kind of examining Gizmo a bit. Billy puts him on this art desk that's got a cup of water on it with all of his paintbrushes in it, which is mistake numero uno. That was a bad idea, Billy. But Pete knocks it over because Pete doesn't know the rules, because why would you tell somebody the rules before letting them see your Mogwai, right? So Pete spills the water and he's like, oh, well, I see you have 5 more Mogwai. Can I have one? Because that's what little kids do, right? And Billy is like, oh, yeah. But then one bites Pete, or tries to bite Pete on the finger at least. And that's when he's like, nah, I actually am good. I'm not really interested in this anymore. I'm going to go over here and read a comic book on the bed. And Billy's like, what the heck? We've got 5 Mogwai here. Aren't you fascinated? And Pete's like, not really. Like, what a little kid reaction. Like, you had a bad experience for 1/2 second. And now you're suddenly like, nah, just throw it in the garbage.
He was on to the next thing. He could care less. He's just like paging through the comic book. This little mistake that our friend Pete made spawning all these is how we end up in Dory's Tavern later in the movie, which is one of my favorite moments. You've got these gremlins are drinking and there's popcorn everywhere. Phoebe Cates, who is a part-time bartender there, she's like trying to, help all the gremlins, serve all the gremlins, I should say. You've got the Flasher gremlin, the Jazz gremlin. They're shooting each other over games of cards. One has a puppet, so the Jazz one hits him over the head with a mallet. And to cap it all off, you've got a gremlin hanging from the ceiling fan, spinning around in circles. That to me captures the Gremlins, like the actual Gremlins themselves and the chaos that they create. Yeah, they did a lot of other things in the movie, but like that scene is like, this is what happens when you don't follow the rules.
Yeah, I really enjoyed those guys that were in the bar. That scene is so funny, and you really get to see like the different personalities of each of the gremlins. Everything kind of just like stands out a bit more. It almost makes some of them likable, that's dangerous.
Yeah.
Another favorite scene of mine would be when Billy opens the door because he's looking for his dog Barney, and he finds Barney strung up from a string of Christmas lights on the front porch. And the family is like trying to imply that somehow Rand, the dad, was at fault for this because he like left the door open. And it's like, if you look at how this dog was hanging up there, like a dog doesn't just like run out the door and all of a sudden, like that dog would have had to like been one of those like show dogs that you like take through the agility course. Like, how does that dog jump that high? They don't.
Yeah.
And if they do, they're not getting stuck in lights like that. That was the work of people with, well, that was the work of creatures with opposable thumbs.
Yeah, wouldn't you think it was like at least like neighborhood kids or something?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Other
I
than
would.
to be like, oh, there's Barney again getting into his trouble.
Yeah, like the bad teenage kids like around the corner.
Speaking of trouble and getting out of control, all these gremlins end up at the little movie theater in town, and it's so memorable because you look out and you see it's the view from the screen looking back at the theater. You can see the projector in the background, and there's just gremlins everywhere, and they look so real. Like there's no CG here. It's like they're all there. They're all have unique personalities. They're getting buck. They got popcorn everywhere and drinks and all sorts of stuff going on. Um, just an amazing sequence of events, and to top it off, they're watching Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. They're all singing along to the movie.
Yeah. How do the gremlins know the song Hi Ho? Because they're like all singing it, and even Gizmo is like out in the auditorium, like or out in the concessions area with Billy and them, and all of a sudden Gizmo is like humming along to it too.
Here's how. Gizmo is like they spawned from Gizmo. Gizmo, we know, likes TV.
I guess.
And that movie came out like so many decades before this time in the movie happened, that I'm sure that Gizmo had some VIP tickets to go see Snow White or something, took a couple friends. So I'm thinking if he saw it, that's how they would know it. And
That makes sense, actually. Thank you for that.
I'm somewhat of an expert when it comes to gremlins now. So
So to touch off of the movie theater scene is that we have Billy gets this bright idea to like just blow up the theater, right? And he's like, this will be the end for all these gremlins. We'll have no more problems after this. But our little friend Stripe has the same problem I have and is like, I need some candy. And he sees over at the department store, there's a neon sign that says candy. And he's like, yum. So Stripe ends up escaping this explosion, and he rolls over to the department store and gets a bunch of candy. He then hops on a skateboard, which is one of my favorite moments. And he is just skating with his arms full of like his candy loot, which is like something that I really strive to accomplish someday. If anybody can teach me how to skateboard, hit me up so I can stop being a poser. And he rolls through the department store. We have a showdown that follows. we get a brief glimpse of an ET toy in the toy department, which is like a nod at Steven Spielberg, producer on this film, who made this film even happen.
I
And
had that. I had that ET doll when I was a kid.
wow.
The one that was in the movie. I still have it. I should say, clarify.
That's really cool. You're such an 80s kid.
It's true.
They end up in the hardware store, and Stripe is like, he somehow knows how to shoot a gun. He knows how to use saw blades. He knows how to use a tiny crossbow. I don't know where we're finding like child-size crossbows, because that wasn't a normal crossbow. Like, he wouldn't have been able to hold a normal crossbow. And then he ends up being like dragged away by this chainsaw that's running. And that's when we get our hero. Gizmo rolls in and is like, I'm going to take care of this. I am strong. I learned how to drive from watching a racing film earlier in the movie. And he's in this like tiny toy Corvette, and he like rolls through there. We see Barney, your favorite. I don't know if you want to talk more about Barney coming back.
Yo, just shining star. He just blasts in there. Boom, Barney, I'm back. And they even said earlier, like a few scenes earlier, they said something like Barney's on vacation, because they were like, I think Deagle was asking Billy where his wretched dog was, and he's like, oh yeah, he's on vacation. And in that moment, you really hadn't seen him much, and all of a sudden, boom, kicks the door open with his paws. Gizmo's there, he hits the blinds. Like, I'd say this whole movie, it's great because when we're rewatching these to prepare for this podcast, you're trying to like kind of like take mental notes. In the first half, not the first half, but the beginning of the movie, it's kind of slow. It's slow. And all of a sudden it's like a big gremlin switch is flipped and the chaos breaks out. And from that point of chaos breaks out, it just keeps building and building and building and building until this department store showdown. And then the eventual Gizmo, Barney, victory.
Love to see it.
So we got a few listener comments. Always good to see them. Frank Welker, Pizza Sutra writes in, Frank Welker is Santa's little helper on The Simpsons.
Frank Welker does a lot of stuff on The Simpsons. I hardly even touched on just how much stuff Frank Welker has done. But like anything that he's in, he like never does just one character, which is like, that just shows how great of a voice he has for this kind of stuff. He can do it all. If I would say that if somebody could go back and watch that Hasbro PulseCon interview that we watched when they were talking about Transformers, and like he was like doing impressions of Megatron, and it like, just watching him get into it, you're like, I could see how this guy could like bounce around to like a million different characters and not even like bat an eyelash. He's fabulous.
Yeah, he also does the voice of some of the Dinobots and Transformers as well. Our friend Nate writes in, if you're on a road trip traveling west with your Mogwai and you cross into the next time zone at 12:37 a.m., is it okay to feed it a gas station roller dog? That's a great question, Nate. As a gremlin expert, I would say we need to go with the position of the sun. And once you cross over into that time zone, the position of the sun has shifted. I wouldn't chance it. However, I would personally eat that roller dog. So, maybe the Mogwai doesn't get the roller dog, but I would definitely pick up one or two for yourself.
Yeah. So what I'm gathering is like, it's 12:37 a.m. in the time zone that you live in, and then you're traveling into the next one. So it would be 11:37 that time, like PM in that new time zone that you're in. So if it's 11:37, you're safe. However, like Baxter said, I'm not going to chance anything even close to midnight because those those little guys are wise. They know how to do everything. They know how to change the stoplights in town so that they're all green. They know how to use a crossbow, they know how to shoot guns, and they know how to change the time on clocks to trick you, purposely trick you, because they know that if they trick you on that, they're going to get food after midnight. So I'm not trusting it. They get fed at the same time every day, just one time a day.
So, in digging into both of these movies, there's a lot of like interesting facts that you uncover. One that I had heard before and comes to mind every time I see like the downtown kind of area of the movie. The set for Kingston Falls is actually the same one that was used in Back to the Future, which came out in 1985. Both of those movies were shot on the same Universal backlot.
Then another fun fact that we have is that in Cantonese, Magwai means something like devil or demon or gremlin. And in like Mandarin, it's pronounced, I think it's Magui, more like. So it's like that's something that like actually is a recognized thing and has been a recognized word for a really long time.
We at the Collect and Destroy podcast love Easter eggs, and not just the chocolate ones, but Easter eggs in films. And at the start of the movie theater is showing A Boy's Life and also a movie called Watch the Skies. The interesting part about that is that those aren't real titles for movies, but they're actually the working titles from Steven Spielberg's E.T., which came out in 1982, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which out in 1977. So it's a nice homage to the executive producer of the film.
So then we also have another little Easter egg, being that Zach Galligan was talking in an interview that when Gremlins was made, there were no CGI involved. So all of the Gremlins had to be animatronic. So they were all puppets made by hand, that were created like by using machines on the inside to create any movements that they would make. And each of these gremlin puppets ended up costing between $30,000 and $40,000 to make. So as a result of that, because that is such a huge investment, they had security come and check everybody's trunks as they were leaving the lot for the day, to make sure that nobody was going to steal any of these gremlins, which is really fascinating, to think like looking back as somebody who's in 2020 being like, can you imagine what one of those would cost today if it cost $30,000 to $40,000 to make then?
Yeah, and that's where like the dawn of CGI, why people make horrible decisions based on money. They're like, "Oh, well we can make the movie for half the cost if we just use a computer." And that's what gave us the Star Wars prequels. So interestingly, before they try to go to the puppetry, the animatronics, there was an idea to actually use monkeys with gremlin masks. But they abandoned this idea because the test monkey that they used panicked once the mask was on, which isn't probably the most ethical thing to do anyways, is put rubber masks on monkeys. But how terrifying, like not even just terrifying like in the movie, but like in real life, to see a monkey running down the street wearing a gremlin mask, be quite the sight to behold.
Another little treat we have is that this movie, along with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which is a Steven Spielberg production, is and they both came out in 1984, which is worth noting. These two movies Temple of Doom and Gremlins were credited with inspiring the MPAA to create the PG-13 rating. So both of these movies people felt were too violent for the PG rating, but not quite violent enough to be considered rated R. And it was something that really bothered Steven Spielberg. So he actually petitioned to the MPAA to get something that was in between so that you'd have some fairness in there. Where you could still have something that was not necessarily geared towards children that younger people could see. You wouldn't have to be 17 or 18 or older to go see something like this, which I found really fascinating. Also, when we're looking back at the Gremlins film, a scene that we're specifically talking about that we already kind of touched on was when Kate talks about her dad dying in the chimney. Is like Joe Dante got yelled at by somebody's mom for that during a test of the film in theaters. Like, when you get yelled at by somebody's mom, you're like, oh, I guess maybe this wasn't right. Maybe not the right thing to do. But it wasn't his fault. I would say that it was more just the fact that like there wasn't anything necessarily violent about it. It just was a little bit dark. So I wouldn't say it was like it deserved an R rating for that reason in particular. But like we've talked about, there's got to be something in between. And I'm really glad that they were able to figure that out after that so that we can continue having movies for people who are like more like tweens or teens.
Yeah, I think that if you're Joe Dante, you're probably like, oh, hey, this movie is effective. Like if you got somebody yelling at you, because there's nothing better. It's like you talking about Candyman all these years later. Like the biggest compliment that Tony Todd can get is like, hey, you have haunted my nightmares my entire life, like since I was a child.
Yeah.
I remember, dressing like Michael Myers, doing business trick-or-treating for kids and scaring more adults than I was kids because the adults grew up as children watching those movies and they still haunt them to this day. Talking about what might have gotten them an R rating, the original Chris Columbus script went through a lot of revisions. There was a version in which they were going to kill the dog, which would have been tragic. And maybe just as tragic, they were going to cut the mom's head off and throw it down the stairs. So those are some, brutal scenes that got cut out of the movie, which allows it to become PG-13, which I think is probably the good, the better choice in these scenarios. So that was Gremlins, the first film. There was a second movie, a sequel that came out in 1990. It was kind of the move to the big city, New York City. Gremlins 2, The New Batch, written by Charles S. Haas, was released on June 15th, 1990. In the sequel to Gremlins, Billy is living in New York City along with his future wife, Kate Berenger, which we both recognize from the original film, same actors. Billy's former bank colleague, Kate, and him. They work for multi-billionaire Daniel Clamp and his building, the Clamp Center. Billy as a graphic artist in the design department and Kate as a tour guide. Billy soon discovers and saves Gizmo from the laboratory in the building where they work. Before he can take Gizmo home, Gizmo gets wet and spawns new Mogwai, even more deranged than the original batch. Billy, along with the help of old friends and new, work to exterminate the gremlins before dark and prevent them from terrorizing New York City and the rest of the world. So, Crystal.
Yes.
What were your initial thoughts of this movie?
My initial thoughts were that, I was really disappointed about Mr. Wing kind of being given like an ultimatum and then them being like, well, did you hear him coughing? We're just going to wait till he dies. And then he literally dies like right after that. They announced like this dude died. So that was like a little bit jarring for me to like just be like, oh, and actually I don't know if I ever actually saw Gremlins 2 in its entirety until we watched it together in preparation for this podcast. I don't think I ever actually watched the full thing. So everything was really fresh and new for me. I do feel like one of my initial takeaways was that this movie didn't age as well as Gremlins 1. And that's mainly for the fact that they use so much tech in this. That's like, when you're living in 2020 and you're looking back at like what they thought like was futuristic technology for that kind of thing, it was kind of like,
Yeah, the
some of it didn't come across as well as it maybe could have.
their commentary on technology I found very hilarious looking at it 30 years later. Um, because like you said, they almost tried to position it like technology was a joke and that people who want the newest and the greatest, it's a joke, and that nothing like technologically advanced works. So like they keep having this joke about the revolving doors not working.
Yeah.
Everything doesn't work as it's supposed to. Looking at it 30 years later, where everything works now, like everything that we have seen in sci-fi movies, aside from flying cars, is now pretty much a reality. So I don't know. It's kind of cool to see how people imagine things would be and have social commentary on that kind of stuff. And maybe that helped push things forward in terms of getting it right. I thought this was a sequel that made sense, though.
Oh
Like
yeah, I would definitely say that the sequel makes sense. I think like what I'm more commenting on is just like the styling of things in this. Like the first movie, people were dressed like, kind of how we dress now. It was like jeans and sweaters, nothing like people were wearing winter
Crystal has a
clothes.
very small town look. Whereas
Yeah,
I'm more like Daniel Clamp. I'm kind of like, always wearing suits and just I'm more elite, I guess you would say.
sure, yeah. This one, like the outfits that people were wearing, specifically the people who like worked in the clamp industry, were like like looking at the tour guides and like their funky hats that they had on, where you're like, nobody would wear stuff like that, whether it's at work or outside of work. Like nobody is wearing, like maybe you would see that like on a runway as something that's like supposed to be avant-garde. But we don't do that. It's not part of a uniform. So it's something that felt a little bit dated to me. Speaking on the technology side of things, I just thought it was really funny that there's like robot voices talking to everybody all the time in that building. Like the intercom is like, and they're very cold, where it's like, "Welcome to the men's room," and then like a guy leaves the men's room, and it's like, "Sure hope you wash those hands." Like, what are you talking about? Maybe we do need that. I mean, speaking in a pandemic, that's probably a good reminder to give people now. And then you have like the robot who's saying like, "Will the owner of the car with license plate number da 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 please remove your car from the clamp parking garage? Your car is old and dirty." Like, it's clearly a robot saying that. So who programmed it to say that?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more humor in this movie than the first movie.
Yeah, I
When you're talking
agree.
about fashion, you're right. There's a lot less timeless fashion and more like what was considered the like cutting edge fashion of the time. A lot of power shoulder pads and like power suits and
For sure.
hairstyles and stuff like that. I very much enjoyed the move from the small town to the big city. It totally shakes things up. Um, and I think that in this movie, the creativity was pushed to the max. So anywhere that they could find new ideas or innovations or inside jokes, they were like putting them everywhere. So this is one of those type of movies you can watch it once, and then the second time you watch it, you're going to catch even more. The third time you're going to watch it, you're going to catch even more. There's always something to discover because the writing is very witty. And, a lot of those jokes fly under the radar unless you know what they're referencing. Um, and kind of like I had mentioned earlier, like I feel like the beginning of the movie is kind of slow paced. And then
Mm-hmm.
when they flip that gremlin switch and the Mogwai, especially in this one, the Mogwai get wet and immediately go to town, causing problems. They're not just in Billy's room.
Oh.
So the origins of this movie, have to do with the success of the movie in 1984. They wanted an immediate sequel because of how well that movie did, the merchandising, the licensing, the everything that went along with it. It was a big hit at the box office. They wanted Joe Dante back right away, and Joe was kind of like, "Nah, I got other things to do." And I don't think it was until they had kind of given him the keys to the car and said, "This is your project. You're in charge of all creative. You're in charge of everything." Did he really, you know, take on the project? Chris Columbus didn't write this one. He was busy directing Home Alone at this point because his career was taking off. It should be noted too that Chris Columbus also wrote Goonies. So he's another one of those folks from that time period,
Yeah,
from the
80s
80s through
icon.
the 90s, that has had just like killer success. He's part of that whole John Hughes circle, which maybe is some of the tie-in with some of the 16 Candles actors. And like I said earlier, the film was meant to be like more cartoon-like
Yeah.
and
Well, and they
not
also like kind of they had even like broached the idea of, oh, maybe we'll send the gremlins somewhere else, like Las Vegas or like a planet like Mars.
Mars.
Yeah, you're like, okay, you were trying to like push it a little bit too far. And then they were like, let's settle somewhere in the middle of New York City, which
Yeah,
makes sense because that's where Gizmo was hanging out anyway.
it makes a lot of sense. It's in the region still. It's in the area, and it's a diversely different backdrop, but not like obviously going to space or something, or going to California. Even like maybe that's a little bit too much for the direct sequel. Maybe the third movie they go to California. I don't know.
Sure.
This movie was also chock full of great actors, and we see a lot of them returning, like Key Luke as Mr. Wing. As you said, it's kind of bittersweet. As Robert Picardo's character shows up in the beginning with a TV to deliver the message from Daniel Clamp that he wants to buy Mr. Wing's shop, which he refuses. We see the return of Zach Galligan, and Phoebe Cates again as Billy and Kate, respectively. It's pretty cool. Like, they came up with a good reason why they would both be at the same location, which I think it's pretty common when people move to a big city that they end up like working in a similar area, trying to make get by and start their new lives. And
When you have situations where you have like a corporation who is rooted somewhere, it would be like living in Providence, Rhode Island, and you and your spouse both work at Hasbro because Hasbro is based out of this area. It's one of
sure.
those things where it's just like, it just makes sense. Like, it's not something that feels weird necessarily. And also, I did enjoy the aspect of them having different roles within the space. However, I feel like Kate deserved a little bit better than just being a tour guide. Like, why couldn't she, I don't know, do something a little bit more? But I digress. I won't get too into it, but Kate
You're
deserved a
just
little bit.
mad at those outfits. You're just mad at those outfits.
Also, I don't think it's safe for her to be on those tours because all of a sudden she would be like, my dad died in the chimney at Christmas. Like, they were setting her up to be public facing. Maybe not a good idea.
Oh, so they're working in the Clamp Center, which is the owned by Daniel Clamp, played by John Glover. He's an eccentric billionaire. It's weird because he was kind of like you get the vibe that maybe he's like this like evil villain kind of guy, but then at the same time he's kind of endearing. Like you kind of like him, and he's kind of silly.
Yeah, he's kind of dopey.
He This actor I immediately recognized because we had just watched Scrooged, and John Glover he played the character that was brought in to assist Bill Murray's character with getting off the Christmas Carol and everything. So it is pretty cool. I often confuse him with Mark Metcalf from Animal House and the Twisted Sister videos and everything. They kind of have a similar vibe to him,
Sure.
similar era and everything.
He also did the voice of the Riddler in Batman the Animated Series. I don't
Oh,
know.
wow.
Yeah, he did that. Like he did the Riddler's voice in like a bunch of stuff.
Sure.
And then he also though he's like kind of, I won't want to say it, but he's kind of like a DC guy because he also was in Batman and Robin. He's like the scientist with Poison Ivy, and also
Yes.
in Shazam. He's like the guy who started that like big corporation, Savannah.
Yeah.
Savannah. I don't know. I can't remember how it's pronounced. But he's like the dad in that, like the older guy who started that company. So he kind of has like, DC lore behind him.
Never watched it, but he was also Lex Luthor's dad on Smallville.
What?
Yes.
I didn't see that. Oh,
Which DC, all those properties are Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers
yeah.
is Gremlins. I don't know if Warner Brothers was Scrooged as well. I'm not too certain on that, but
I feel like it
what
might have been. That would make sense.
what a rabbit hole to go down there with John Glover. Haviland Morris is there with bright red hair. That's Billy's boss.
She was in 16 Candles,
Yes, which
which
I
I did not even
saw,
recognize.
but I did not recognize her at all.
Me neither. I was like looking through the credits for her on IMDb, and I'm like, 16 Candles? I feel like I would recognize somebody who looks as like memorable as she does in this film, but she doesn't look like this at all in that movie. She's like the hot girlfriend
Yeah, she's
of
like blonde.
who ends up like getting her hair cut because it's caught in the bathroom door.
Yep. Yeah.
But that was really fascinating to me. I literally found that out today and I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, her character is very pushy, conniving. She's trying to get Billy to go on a date with her. Billy's like kind of like feels like he's stuck because she's his boss, and I feel really bad for Kate in that scenario because she's jumping to all sorts of conclusions with Billy, and Billy's not really actually involved with his boss. But
yeah, Marla was definitely, she was bound to get Me Too'd. She was not doing a good job at being a boss.
on the flip side of things, Murray and Sheila Flutterman, they coming into New York as tourists to visit Billy. I really like Murray in this movie. Like you saw a little bit of the character in the first movie, but he's got much more of a heroic kind of role in this movie. He's much more involved in helping and battling the gremlins.
When he's like the guy who like he knows what's up. He knows what's going on. And even though nobody believes him, he's like adamant about it now. Like, I was right the first time. I know I'm right the second time too.
Yep. He feels vindicated.
Yeah, he's really good. So on top of all these great casts that have been returning, a couple newbies, we have another new guy who is Robert Prosky, who plays the character of Grandpa Fred. He is a failed news anchor. He ends up hosting this cable show that's on the Clamp Cable Network, CCN. It's called Grandpa Fred's House of Horrors. He looks fantastic. This guy's character, it's something that doesn't really make that much sense in the scheme of things, but I really enjoy him being in it. And also, like, that dude was in a bunch of stuff as well. He was in like Mrs. Doubtfire. He was in Rudy, Miracle on 34th Street. Really good actor.
Speaking of 16 Candles, we got Getty Watanabe, he plays the role of Mr. Katsuji, and who's basically a Japanese tourist. He's at the microwave cooking show. And immediately I'm like, oh my God, that's Long Duck Dong from 16 Candles. We already had the grandpa in the previous movie. He's in this one. Marla's in the Haviland Morris, who plays Marla. She was in 16 Candles. Like, there's all these connections there. Again, the John Hughes thing.
Getty Watanabe, also known for his role as Nurse Yosh Takada in ER. That's something that my family watched when we were kids. Um, and also another thing from my childhood, he did the voice of Ling from Mulan, which was like there was a group of three dudes in this like army troop that Mulan was trying to join. Their names were Yao, Ling, and Qian Po. And they were like super hostile towards Mulan, but then they ended up becoming like some of her closest companions eventually. I had no idea that Getty Watanabe did the voice for Ling or anybody in Mulan, but I'm like, that one really sings to me.
One of the legends that shows up in this movie is Christopher Lee. He plays the head scientist at the Splice of Life lab located on the 51st floor of the Clamp Center. Dr. Cushing Catheter.
Great name.
Great name, great character. He owns it. It's like it's more just about the fact that it's Christopher Lee than anything else. He played, Dracula in the Hammer horror film, Scaramanga in James Bond, The Man with the Golden Gun. Most recently, people would know him as Count Dooku in Star Wars, or Saruman in Lord of the Rings. This is like the coolest dude ever. He's been in like a million movies. He put out 2 metal albums in 2010 and 2013 with members of Black Sabbath and Judas Priest. Check those out if you haven't. Go check out his albums. They're pretty awesome. And then just the fact that he's like this fantasy horror legend. It's good anytime you have a movie like this and you can get some big name legends just to make an appearance. Rob Zombie's great at that in his movies. He puts all sorts of legends in his movies. And even if they have a really small part, it's just really cool to see them on the big screen again.
For sure.
So we have a character called the Delivery Man. And I don't have the actor's name. I can't off the top.
Raymond Cruz.
Yeah, Raymond Cruz. Off the top of my head, I couldn't remember it, but let's just call him who he is. He's Tuco. This guy is Tuco from Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul. Shows up in both series. He's had parts in X-Files. His part in this movie pretty small, other than the fact that he delivers Gizmo to the laboratory. Actually, he's making deliveries to the laboratory. He hears Gizmo singing the Gizmo song. He's elsewhere in the studio, and he is whistling that same song, which then Billy realizes that Gizmo is on site.
Somebody's knocking on our door. Like here, right now. We're not expecting guests, everyone. I don't know why someone's knocking. Should I go check it?
Why don't you go check it? Check it live.
Oh, this is cool.
And we're back.
Yeah, that was really strange. We don't get visitors here. We don't really know anybody here. We live in an apartment building. Somebody just knocked on the door. I was like, well, maybe it's like maintenance. We had like some problems with a leak in our house last weekend, but like it wasn't. I could hear like it was like uh I don't know. It wasn't like one of the maintenance guys. But I just opened the door. Like, there's nobody in the hallway or anything. So maybe we got visited by a ghost. I don't know.
Wait, so nobody was there?
Bro, nobody is there. I heard a voice, though. I heard the knock, and then I heard a voice. Maybe they were looking
All
for.
right, so this is the second time during this podcast that we've had a gremlin-like situation. One was that weird mic sound that came from nowhere. And the second was a mystery knock on the door. So
The next episode we do is going to have to be Poltergeist.
this is actually part of the script for Gremlins 3. So Howie Mandel, Frank Welker return as voice actors again, voicing Gizmo and this time Mohawk instead of Stripe. We have the inclusion though of Tony Randall of Odd Couple fame. He plays Brain Gremlin, and it's like one of those things where I knew he was in the movie, but I didn't really remember who he played. And as soon as this character drinks that serum and becomes Brain Gremlin, he aced it. It was what a great person to be playing this character.
Yeah, I think that part is so funny. Like, as soon as you hear him start talking, and also, like, he gets glasses. Like, they just, like, come out of nowhere. Like,
perfectly fitting glasses.
Yeah, part of the genetic DNA makeup of this gremlin was glasses. It's not like, oh, he's got poor vision, so we had to get him glasses. He comes out with glasses.
There's some interesting gremlin characters in this one. Another voice actor, the last one I would like to touch on is Mark Dodson, who plays Daffy, George, and Lenny, who are basically the main Mogwai that come out of Gizmo and become gremlins. And Daffy has this laugh in the movie, and immediately I hear this laugh, and I'm like, oh my God, that's Salacious Crumb. And then I go, oh, who played Salacious Crumb? Mark Dodson plays Salacious Crumb. Mark Dodson plays these three gremlins. I think it's a little over a year now, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. I actually met Mark Dodson at a con, and nicest guy. He even did the Salacious Crumb laugh. I got a nice autographed photo of Salacious Crumb there. Mark Dodson. It says, "To Baxter, keep laughing." Great to meet your heroes, especially when they play little tiny characters from Star Wars.
Oh yeah, voice actors, fantastic. Puppet actors are another like secret fave of mine, which like that it'll come up a lot as we talk about different nerd things. Is people who do the puppets and who do voices and bring joy to people through those venues, like they're so special. And Mark Dodson also really special to like nerd culture because of Salacious Crumb. Like super simple character, but like really important.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of my life, like no one really knew that character's name.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until recently that you get much more. When you go as long as we did with no new Star Wars, people start to dig at everything they can find, and all of a sudden that character starts to rise. I always wanted to start a punk band called Salacious Crumb. Never actually came to life, but I always thought that would have been a good name for a band. Many favorite moments in this movie, things that stand out. One of which is when Marla wants to take Billy to a restaurant. And it's very common, I think, in the business world to be like, oh, let me take you to this new Vietnamese restaurant or this new Korean restaurant. Oh, it's this great new food. Well, in this instance, Marla's like, hey, there's this great new place. It's Canadian themed. Which isn't just something that you never see in the real world. The servers are dressed as Mounties. And at the end of dinner, he comes to bring their signature dish, which is signature dessert, which is the chocolate mousse. And it's not like chocolate mousse like you think. It's actually a like full size mousse head made out of sculpted chocolate.
My favorite part about that scene is, well, first of all, the acknowledgement that like New York City's not that far from Canada, so it's not like this is like something exotic for New Yorkers.
It's like going to Tim Hortons.
Yeah, exactly. And then also that when they bring that chocolate mousse, the waiter is like, and our favorite Canadian dessert, the chocolate mousse. And you're like, oh, that's really where the gravy is on that scene, is the fact that they're talking in Canadian accents in New York. Also, I would like to thank my Wisconsin upbringing that I can do a really good Canadian accent anytime you want me to. So I guess we can talk about my favorite scene. Well, my first of a few favorite scenes is the cooking show that they're filming in this building, because it's a cable network building. So there's, tapings going on all over the place. They're live tapings. People are generally able to come watch. As we know that Gede Watanabe's character ends up like participating in being a viewer. He's like on a tour and they're going to go check out some of the shows that are being recorded. And, Microwave with Marge also speaks to my Midwest upbringing, because she is out here doing her best. She is making some of the most disgusting things to anybody who's not from like her circle. Like you would be like, we have bologna and bean dip roll-ups. Like, that sounds awful. But I'm sure in her little circle of friends, it goes over really well at like the Christmas cocktail hour. She's also got this giant stock pot. She's making something that she calls tuna noodle cheese product chowder surprise. So she's not really good with naming her recipes, but like I would like to believe that Marge knows what she's doing. She's like, there's something behind this mania.
I like her multiple mentions of cheese product.
Oh
Even
yeah,
when she's talking to Murray's wife about a recipe, she's like talking about the cheese
the cheese
product.
product. Yeah, where you're like, I mean, for any of us who know what's up, cheese product is like, it's just Velveeta, but it's not like, you wouldn't call it cheese. It
Yeah, I
is
think that
a product that's supposed to be like cheese, but it's not cheese.
there's so much foreshadowing of the time of where we're headed, because nowadays like we've kind of tried to remove like cheese like products from our like, that's not a promotion, like not that they would promote it that way, but people started reading the boxes and realizing that like, oh, that's not actually cheese, oh, that's not actually fish, oh, that's not, like you start to realize that these things that you grew up with weren't actually the thing that they were touted as.
Yes.
And we live in a time now where artificial flavors and artificial colors are being removed from foods so that it can be all natural. So it's kind of a cool evolution of our society to see it being more sustainable and cost effective to eat healthier.
Well, and like you also think about if they were making fun of it, which they had to have been making fun of that kind of stuff. Like they were a little bit before their time, being mid 1980s and being like, yo, some of the stuff that like our moms and grandmas have been making because they got it from some 1950s cookbook is not okay. Like this is not okay. um but back to like why this is one of my favorite scenes is these fresh gremlins come out here into her set and they just terrorize Marge. Like I'm really feeling for Marge. One is in her stock pot of her chowder surprise. One of them is in one of the cupboards, one's in the refrigerator throwing eggs, and the one that's in the cupboard starts like pulling her into the cupboard by her hair. Like it's like funny, but also she got mistreated. And she probably didn't deserve that. She
She
was
might she might
cook and
might
make a
have
buck.
deserved. She might
Uh,
have deserved it.
but then they like the gremlins take all these pans and they're like, we're gonna put them in the microwave. And Marge is like, no, they can't put them in the microwave. And because they put them in the microwave, we all know what happens when you put metal in the microwave. It's going to cause sparks. Something's going to start on fire, and it's going to make the sprinklers in the building go off, which creates this gigantic problem called more gremlins. That's where the problems really all started, is that scene right there, the microwave with Marge. Worst day of her
Yeah.
life.
One of the standout things in the movie is one of the standout things in the movie is this evolution of different gremlin characters. So how do you justify creating all these different types of gremlins? Well, you start out with Gizmo in a laboratory, which then leads to all of these gremlins ending up in the same lab in the building, which this whole movie takes place. And because they're testing all these different kinds of serums and food additives and all this stuff, you start creating all these different types of gremlins. You've got the smart gremlin, the brain gremlin, as we talked about. You have a bat gremlin who they end up giving like some sort of like sunblock injection so that it can fly around outside, which is absolutely terrifying. You have one that they're calling vegetable medley because he starts growing tomatoes out of his face and essentially turns into a salad. They throw some acid on one of them, so he puts on a mask like the Phantom of the Opera, which again is just like this inside joke. Um, Greta, who is like a total babe gremlin, um, and and she's got major like Miss Piggy vibes to her.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's like, you know, like I said, you're going to get a lot of puppet appreciation when you're dealing with me, but that nod to like her attitude being like Miss Piggy, like I'm in charge, I'm taking what I want, is admirable.
This movie really just starts to give them all much more personality and individuality, which actually also becomes cool when you talk about toys because there's so much more opportunity to make unique toys that stand out and don't just use the same mold for all of them. I think the biggest big bad moment is when Mohawk becomes the spider gremlin. And what's really cool about that too is Slayer's Angel of Death starts playing as soon as he chugs that serum and transforms into this horrifying spider, which is the moment where you were like, this is almost scarier than the first movie.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say that it isn't. Like, I think the first movie was more violent, but there's moments of this movie that are much more terrifying to me.
Yeah, I agree. The differences in the gremlins is it definitely adds to the frightening aspect, while still maintaining like the bit of humor. Like even though one of them grows wings and is essentially a bat gremlin, like you also have him break through the wall and there's a Batman symbol that he leaves in the wall. It's not like a cutout of bat wings, it's the Batman symbol. So
Yeah.
like you have a really good juxtaposition of we're making this a lot creepier by, you know, it's like the idea of giving like an alligator wings where you're like, oh, this would be a lot scarier if an alligator could fly or whatever, or
Yeah.
like if a shark could walk. Where they do something like that. But like the way that they still paired it with the comedy, it it still makes it more allowable for children to be interested in, especially kids who like creepy things. Um, Another one of my favorite moments is they decide they're going to break the fourth wall in this film, which is like plays into Joe Dante really going like full anarchy on this movie
Yep.
with his direction of it. Billy is arguing with the lab scientist about the gremlins and like what they've seen, what they know about them. And all of a sudden you get these like, if you've ever seen a movie where like it's on a projector, which we don't really deal with much today. But sometimes you'll get like little like grainy like blips in it, or like it'll fall off the reel and you'll all of a sudden it'll just like spin out. Well, you started to get that in the middle of this movie, and you're like, okay, well, especially watching it now, you know, we're watching a digital version, so why is it doing this? But if you were watching it in that moment, like in
In
the
the
theater,
theater.
like, hey, you'd probably have people getting up to like go complain to the ushers. But what actually happens is they interrupt this in this way, and it cuts to an actual theater that's like people are seeing a movie and gremlins are causing a disturbance. And somehow Hulk Hogan was watching this movie, and
Of course.
he's in costume because that's what wrestling was back then. Like you had to
Brother.
be in character anytime you left the house. And the usher was like, hey, Hulk Hogan, can you like help us out? We've got gremlins causing trouble. And like Hulk Hogan's just like, yeah, sure, why not?
Let me tell you, brother. People want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth. Do I have to come up there myself? Do you think the Gremsters can stand up to the Hulkster, brother?
So Hulk Hogan cuts this awesome promo on the Gremlins to get them to knock it
He
off.
tears off his shirt.
And yeah, he does tear off his tank top that he's wearing in typical fashion. Shows off his skin of a hot dog look that he's always had going, still has going today. Never changed, I guess.
One of my absolute favorite moments is the whole sequence inspired by Rambo, in which Gizmo, I've written it down as to survive war, you got to become war, Gizmo. He starts lifting weights. He gets all amped up. He fashions a bow and arrow from things that he finds on hand, and he makes like a Molotov cocktail arrow, very similar to the exploding arrows in First Blood Part 2 Rambo. And Murray's like, hey Billy, what got into Gizmo? And Billy's like, I don't know, I guess they just pushed him too far.
Yeah, that is so amazing. And Gizmo is so cute. That whenever he does something that's based off of something that was seen on TV, you can't not appreciate it. It's like dealing with an actual little kid who sees stuff. There's our little guy. With a little kid who sees stuff and then emulates it and wants to be it. And like, this is too real, where like you see something, you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go get a headband like that. Like, and then you have Ethan Page, who's the karate man, but he actually looks a lot like Gizmo doing the Rambo bit. I wouldn't say that he looks like Rambo. I'm not gonna go that far. He looks like Gizmo doing the Rambo. Lastly, on our list of favorite scenes is Grandpa Fred's big break. He calm under pressure at the end of the world. This man takes over and does the news, delivers what the people need to know at the time they need to know it most. It just so happens that he has to commandeer a guest of the studio, who is Gede Watanabe's character, who like has a camera with him the full time. He's trying to like take pictures of everything, record everything. Even before this moment, he's like, I'm like filming a documentary. Here is what it feels like. It's not
Yeah,
actually
he
what
makes he makes a comment that's like, "Can I run a camera? I am a camera."
Yeah, when Grandpa Fred asks him if he's able to run a camera because they're like the only two around, he's like, yeah, I am a camera. Let's do this. So the two of them team up. Great pair. Grandpa Fred happens to still be dressed as a vampire, which somehow makes it that much more endearing. And like it really is his big break, because when all is said and done and the movie's ending, who gets an anchor position for the network? Grandpa Fred do.
When the filmmakers chose the John Rambo character for Gizmo to impersonate, um, they had to get permission from Sylvester Stallone, which is pretty cool about the Sylvester Stallone roles, because he kind of has created these characters himself. He's written a lot. People don't give him enough credit for what he's done for movies and in the 80s and the future of film, just because of being Sylvester Stallone. So it's pretty cool to find out that they actually did have to reach out to Sylvester Stallone and he approved that character usage.
We also have in this film, at the beginning, there's kind of a tone set for what to anticipate throughout this movie as you're watching it. We have a Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck appearance. So it's kind of like the Looney Tunes opening. You have like the Warner Brothers, you have the red circles, and everything's appearing like it's about to be a Looney Tunes show, or like there's some kind of like a short in the beginning or something like that. But it's actually more of like we're setting the pace for this film for the audience, that this is going to be a little bit more lighthearted, a little bit more cartoony than Gremlins from 1984 was portrayed as, because that the first film got so much criticism for being too dark that they were like, all right, let's flip the script and go a little bit more cartoony on this one. And they really did. Like, even though we talk about things being a little bit creepy, there's still so much humor in this, and like slapstick violence, that you kind of overlook those parts where it's like a little bit like, oh, that character is a little scary.
I found something that I found very interesting is that the aerial shots of New York City in the beginning of the movie, they kind of have a nice like flyover of New York City. That was actually stock footage from Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, which came out in 1987, as you can see.
One thing about like the opening from this that I wrote down immediately was just in all caps, Twin Towers, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, because like there's so many things from the 80s that you see where you're like, oh yeah, like they're showing shots of New York. There's the Twin Towers. Those aren't there anymore. Like it's such a very crucial thing that was a part of the New York skyline, which is a famous skyline, and then to like not have it anymore since 2001. For anybody who lived through 9/11, you will recognize it anytime you see something that has those towers in it. It always ends up being something that like really draws my eye in.
Yeah, I think that when I was a kid, I had no idea what the Twin Towers were. And like I probably wouldn't have thought anything of it, because I'm like thinking Empire State Building, Statue of Liberty. Like those as a kid, Brooklyn Bridge. Like those are the things that I thought of as a kid. But as an adult, like you said, watching movies, every time I see the Twin Towers pre 9/11, I immediately am drawn to those as a beacon.
Another interesting fact that we have would be there's this strange moment where like things are unraveling around the CCN building, and there's like Clamp decides, okay, we need to switch over to this broadcasting. It's an uplifting seeming end of the world clip that they start showing. It was included by filmmakers in Gremlins 2 because they had found out that one of the news networks in real life, like in our timeline here in the United States, has a video very similar to this that they've prepared to run in case of the end of the world. So that cable network would be CNN. They have a video for this purpose in its archive. Its staff are instructed, hold this video for release until the end of the world is confirmed. So it's kind of one of those things where you're like, well, how are we confirming it? What has to happen for us to know that it truly is the end of the world?
Yeah, that's pretty dark. I can't. It's like just something that you don't think of because you're like, oh well, if it's the end of the world, why would they even bother with a video?
Exactly.
But that's the War of the Worlds that I want to see when CNN just runs that video for fun to freak everyone out and mass hysteria. Something that stood out to me right away when I was seeing this film was like, I was like, hey, that janitor looks really familiar. Like, I'm like, I know that guy's been in a bunch of stuff. What is he from? And then I'm like, oh yeah, that's John Astin. He played Gomez Adams in the Addams Family. And most recently, we saw him appear as the game show host on Pig and a Poke on National Lampoon's European Vacation. But when Gizmo first sees the janitor character, again, there's like all these little hidden jokes. He actually says Gomez, in his little Gizmo Mogwai voice to reference his character on the Addams Family. And in looking up John Astin, I found out a really interesting fact. Again, talking about DC Comics, DC shows in the 1960s Batman show. The actor Frank Gorshin played the Riddler. You had just mentioned our boy John Glover playing the Riddler in voice. Well, Frank Gorshin played the Riddler on the TV show, but there was some sort of contract dispute, and during that contract dispute, John Astin came in and played the Riddler for 2 episodes of the show. So oddly, all of a sudden, the actor's a different guy who's Gomez Adams of all people.
Yeah, that's wild.
And then John Astin's gone, and Frank Gorshin's back, and everything is good to go.
And our last little fun fact is the character of Grandpa Fred was based on Al Lewis's character, Grandpa Munster, from the television series The Munsters in 1964. And in the 1980s, Lewis, as Grandpa Munster, like in full character, would host a show on TBS called Super Scary Saturday, where he would show old monster movies just like Grandpa Fred did for Gremlins 2. So it's like a nice nod to like a horror icon, but also like a really friendly horror icon. Grandpa Munster, so cute.
Yeah, I can't believe how much he looks just like Grandpa Fred. Like Grandpa Fred looks just like he does from the Munsters.
Yeah, when we watched this together, that was like the first thing I said. I was like, is that him? There's no way that could be him. Like he would have been pretty old by that point. And he still looked like he was like the same age or maybe even younger than Grandpa Munster. So it was one of those things where it's like, wow, that guy is a spitting image. And I wonder, like, was that something that they were looking for? Is it something that like a character they developed with that guy in mind? There's more to that I would like to pick the brain of everybody involved with the film.
Yeah, I'm sure that they for sure were going to try to replicate that actor and um, that kind of thing. It's like similar where it's like he used to be an anchor and now he's just this host, and he used to be Grandpa Monster and have more fame and glory, and now he's just hosting these night nighttime horror movie shows. So let's talk a little bit about the special effects in both movies. Um, as our listeners know, if they listen to multiple episodes, huge fan of practical effects. Um, CG, again, I think CG should be used to enhance practical effects instead of just completely take over for the practical effects. So it's so cool to see the puppetry and the animatronics of Gizmo and the Gremlins. It's just very believable, right out of the gate.
Yeah, I think it's really important to try to create something that's as seamless as possible with the tools that you have available to you. Um, what I really appreciated from this movie was, well, I guess we're talking about both films throughout this sequence. So the second film, I feel like the way that they metamorphed was way creepier. However, in the first film, I think that their metamorphosis was way more metal. So like in the first one, there's like these like flashing lights like that change color. There's fog that's like showing up, like rising out of from inside of their little cocoons. So it just kind of creates a very like, oh, I'm kind of like at a show right now. Whereas the second one, it kind of got like a little bit more gritty,
Yeah.
but maybe that means it looked a little bit more realistic.
Yeah, I definitely like the pupil stage stuff. It's kind of like alien-esque, like that it gets like gooey and gross. And that's the change from like um Gizmo is nice and cute and furry and soft, and then they get all slimy and gross, and these monsters come out, and it's like it's almost like the idea you have this cat, and if you were to shave your cat and then it was just this gross, grotesque creature under all its like nice fur. Um One of the things I really appreciate was the end of the first movie, where again Barney the dog comes in and saves the day with Gizmo. Um, I liked they threw one last jump scare in there where the skeleton jumps out, and just the way that it like dissolves, and like you're like, well, it can't be alive. It's just a skeleton, but it's still like kind of moving because it's dissolving, and really appreciate that.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the little jump scare thrown in there at the end. You don't get a lot of jump scares throughout these films in general. However, with sticking to a horror-esque theme, you there's always got to be at least one. Like there's any horror film that you see, there's going to be at least one jump scare. And this was their moment, was like you think that Stripe is dead and then all of a sudden he's like ah. And it actually is a little bit creepy. Like it's a little jarring.
Chris Wallace, who created the Gremlins in the first movie, he declined the opportunity to work on the special effects and do the Gremlins again in the second movie, because he was going to go on to do The Fly 2, which I know The Fly was a successful movie, but it's really hard to imagine somebody going to do The Fly 2 instead of Gremlins 2, which then opens the door for them to pursue Rick Baker, very famous special effects artist, The Exorcist, Star Wars, An American Werewolf in London, The Howling. The list goes on and on. Rick Baker's the man. Something I heard in a Rick Baker interview was a lot of the creatures you see in the cantina scene in the original Star Wars trilogy. Those were actually Rick Baker mask creations that he had created just on his own. So like the devil looking guy, that was just a devil looking mask that he had created. And all of a sudden it's a race of aliens, and now it's in The Mandalorian because Rick Baker just happened to have a stockpile of masks he had already developed just for fun. So that probably was supposed to be a demon and not an alien. And now it's a race of aliens in Star Wars lore.
Yeah, it's
Um,
really cool.
he turned it down initially because he didn't want to work on somebody else's creation, essentially. Like Gremlins wasn't his idea. So Chris Wallace, he had created Gremlins. So Rick's saying this is going to be a ton of work to get involved with something that I didn't even invent. So what convinced him was he got kind of freedom and reign to create these gremlins in a new look and style that kind of gave them all their own personality, which is very much reflected throughout this film. And I think is probably one of the key signifiers, other than the small town, big town thing. The key signifier is the individuality of the gremlins, whether it's just when they hatch from Gizmo or when they go through their transformations in the laboratory. So one huge part about this franchise is the collectibility of these characters. There's so many products, starting with the original run. LJN, who did a lot of wrestling figures, they did a lot of Gremlin figures around the time of the first movie. Just really great, recognizable characters. It's easy to put Gizmo and Gremlins on everything. There was the creators of Uno actually came out with a Gremlins card game, which I haven't played because it's still in the original wrapping, but great art on the package. Just looks really fun. Anything Gremlins themed is just really easy to make it eye-catching.
Yeah, I say gremlins are so cute that you could do anything with a gremlin and people would be like, yeah, take my money.
It's kind of like Freddy Krueger. Like you could put Freddy on anything, and old or young, you're gonna be interested in it.
Yeah.
Even if it's like scary, if the movie's too scary for a kid, the rub and play transfer set by Color Forms probably not too scary.
Or
And this looks
the
like something
adorably
from your
cuddly Furby.
more. This looks something more from your childhood. The Gizmo Furby.
Yeah, definitely. I had Furbies growing up. Mine were like the NASCAR checkered flag one.
What?
Um,
That exists?
oh yeah, for sure. Also, that's like my childhood. Um, so I didn't have this really cool Gizmo one. I wonder. I feel like I kind of remember it. I definitely remember it being like a Furby production. Like it's not like it's some like off kind of thing. It's something related to the Furbies.
Sure. Yeah, what I think is cool is that I think Gizmo makes a lot of sense to make a Furby at the time. Before this came out, I remember thinking like, oh, that would make a really good Furby. And then they, of course, go ahead and do that. And there were just so many products like the Wax Packs cards from Tops. There's so many great licensed things that you can still find out on the market for a reasonable price if you're interested in collecting these types of things. I'm always on the lookout for anything 80s, especially just these major pop culture references. If you're looking at more like modern toys, I definitely say go NECA. I feel like every podcast is basically an advertisement for NECA, but it's because they're putting out killer toys at a reasonable price.
Yeah,
And they,
NECA always does a great job. And because of the wide array of personalities that you see throughout all the
yeah,
Gremlins, you get so many options for toys that are based on each of those characteristics. So you have, ones that have like the 3D glasses and the popcorn and the soda, who are like in the
yeah, you have ones that are like very detailed. And the other thing that NECA does a really great job at is the accessory packs that they have. Allows you to really customize the scene. So like the Flasher Gremlin comes with the cards and the poker chips and all sorts of stuff that you would want to customize a bar scene. And we're back.
Sorry, everyone. Mic problems.
Hey, no problem. We're back. So we were just talking about how it's nice that NECA has like all the accessories
Yes.
to customize.
I really appreciate that.
One of the most unique figures I've seen is the Lightning Gremlin by NECA, which is like basically it's like a blue plastic character that looks just like imagine the Lightning character in the movie. If you could make a figure of that, I always think it's great when looking for figures to add to your collection, things that are like ultra unique and very like oddball, I guess. So you grow up and you get all the main Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle characters, you get all the main X-Men characters, but then when there's like weird tertiary film characters, I think that's always a nice addition to the collection.
Definitely. And like something that's so unique, I feel like is really crucial to things like this is like the collectability of it is you have something that like it's about a very specific point in the movie. It's not in all the movies. And it's not even like in the movies for a long time.
Who doesn't want a Gizmo doll? Especially one that dances and sings.
Yeah, Gizmo has got to be the most profitable of any of the characters from this film or this series of films.
I've been thinking about this a lot lately with the dawn of Grogu, Baby Yoda from The Mandalorian. He's everywhere, and really, Gizmo is the original Baby Yoda.
Yes, I agree with that. That was like my thoughts completely. I mean, first of all, just look at him. He's got these like big old ears. He's got a very expressive face, and it's amazing animatronics that you're dealing with. You're dealing with something that was like a really deep investment in creating a great puppet.
So when you have all these great NECA figures, something that's really cool is the kind of photography. Like there's a lot of toy photographers out there who set up really cool advanced dioramas. When it comes to Gremlins, there's one key guy that everyone needs to go follow. Check him out on Twitter. Check him out on Instagram. His handle is TJ_Gremlin_guy. So it's TJ Gremlin guy. Look him up. He does really nice advanced dioramas. At New York Toy Fair last year, I saw a huge diorama, which is essentially the entire bar scene. Dory's Tavern from the first movie, and he's taken all of these great NECA figures and built a scene that has them playing pool, eating popcorn, playing arcade games. You've got the iconic Bumblebee puppet scene with the jazz gremlin and even the poker scene right before someone gets shot. But again, TJ Gremlin Guy, check that out. I would also recommend following Lord of the Mogwais on Instagram, which is just a bunch of great collectibles related to gremlins and Mogwais in general. So we haven't had a lot of content for Gremlins in quite some time. But it was recently announced that there is going to be an animated series called Gremlins, The Secrets of the Mogwai, which is coming to HBO Max, I believe, in 2021. What are your thoughts? What have you heard? What's the word on the street, Crystal?
Well, the word on the street is I don't really know a ton about this. You know, kind of looking forward to it, I would say. I like Gremlins a lot, and if there's any indicator of bringing back things and redoing them in a great way that were from the 80s, I would say looking at the Crystal Skull, or not the Crystal Skull, not the Crystal Skull.
We can't talk about that.
The Dark Crystal series. They took that movie, they brought it back as a Netflix series, and it was so beautiful. Like the way that everything was done, magnificent. If they can do something even remotely similar, like I think that this is supposed to be more like an animated thing. But even so, if they could do something that just like really does tribute to the creativity that was used in the original movies, I think that this could be really great, even from just an artistic standpoint. Not even to mention like whatever the storyline's going to end up being.
Yeah, I think this is a great way to bring relevance back to the series. Like I mentioned, the collectibilities right now is really hot, and those are selling really well. There's a lot of creativity coming out for those. But to actually bring some new content to light is a great idea. This is going to be a prequel series, so there'll be 10 episodes, and it actually takes place in 1920s Shanghai, East China. And it's going to tell the story about 10-year-old Sam Wing, who meets Gizmo, and I'm sure many antics ensue. But it'll be cool to add to more of the lore that happens well before we're introduced to Billy and Kate and all of our friends from the first movie. I do also think that this creates a launch pad for us to get a live action movie. If the most recent Star Wars movies tell us anything, it's that puppetry, animatronics, and practical effects are definitely the way to go, especially when you're revisiting classic properties like Star Wars or Gremlins. So I think that they could definitely not pull a George Lucas and try to do this with CGI, because if they would have done this around the early 2000s, they probably would have tried to make a bunch of CGI gremlins and a CGI Mogwai, like the way that they did with Yoda in the prequels. And CGI Yoda, definitely not as cool as puppet Yoda, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, but CGI Yoda can do things that Yoda would have been doing at that point in his life. Like puppet Yoda would not have been able to carry out the kind of fight scenes that CGI Yoda needed to carry out.
Technology wasn't there, though, to make it look realistic.
Anyway, as far as the legacy of Gremlins, there was a lot of stuff. Obviously, we talked about like collectibles that had come out that have, continued to come out over the years as Gremlins continues to have such an important role in our culture, specifically pop culture. And there were two Gremlins rides that we never got to participate in. But they were in Australia and Germany, and the last one closed in 2004, but it was like based on the scene where they're in the movie theater, or well, you are in the movie theater as the person who's going on the ride, and gremlins come in and like disrupt the show. Like you're supposed to be there seeing some kind of like WB outtakes, like some like weird
Yeah.
stuff that you would like go see at like a theme park.
Yeah.
So you're supposed
Backlot
to be going to
studio tour.
what?
A backlot studio tour.
Yeah, kinda. So you're seeing like some little outtakes from some cartoons or something, and then all of a sudden the gremlins really disrupt your show, and you have to get into these little cars and you go through a ride. It doesn't sound like it's like a thrill ride by any means, but that it was, a fun little thing.
I thought you were going to tell me that they lock the doors and they light everyone on fire, but
Yeah, you're in the theater and it explodes. Okay,
was it the
Kate,
same?
you're getting a little morbid here.
Was it the same ride in both locations?
I didn't end up finding any footage of the
Sure.
ride, so I can't really compare. I don't think it's said explicitly whether they were the same or not, but I would like to think that they're fairly similar. All they mentioned was that like you were in a theater, you get into little cars, you go through a ride.
So I would assume that once the animated series comes out, they'll get more support, garner more support to go to a live action movie. I think the best way to do this, instead of just looking at it as a one-off movie, is to maybe plan out like some sort of trilogy. Get actors signed on for multiple films, like any franchise. They tend, whether it's the Avengers or it's Spider-Man, they generally get a multi-contract, multi-film deal. Um, and also that avoids that situation where you create a great standalone movie and then it's like, oh, where do we go from here? Oh, we're going to Mars now, I guess, because we didn't have any plans beyond that. I definitely think this is doable though. So I'm very excited to see it. I'm the perfect age for this. I think that there's just like from little kids up until our parents, um, all appropriate generations for something like this.
For sure.
So there's definitely an audience. And with the success we've seen in revamping or making sequels to classics from the 70s and 80s lately, putting fans of those franchises in charge of those franchises is always the best way to do it.
Yep,
So
definitely the route to go.
you can see that in people like Jon Favreau and the things that he's been able to do with these properties. So you ready for the final segment?
Yeah.
All right, it's time for our final segment of the podcast, a very special holiday edition of the Firing Squad. In this segment, I will be asking our guests 10 quick-fire questions. Crystal hasn't seen this list of questions prior to me asking them, so her questions should be quick and simple with no explanation needed. You know what, though, Crystal? This is a holiday episode. Take your time with your answers. We can have a little bit of discussion if you'd like.
Thank you.
Crystal, are you ready?
I am.
All right. Number one, your favorite go-to holiday film.
I gotta go with The Year Without a Santa Claus. It's so cute, and the Heat Miser and the Snow Miser, their little songs, just so catchy.
Incredible Rankin Bass film. They always do such a great job. Why isn't it CGI, Crystal?
Because puppets are better. No, just kidding. Because they didn't have the technology.
If they were younger, Heat Miser would be doing flips in the air and stuff and shooting fireballs out of his eyes.
Well, we need to revisit this then.
Number two, favorite Christmas cookie to eat.
Oh boy. I think it's okay. Well, I have to go with the obvious because we've been housing them since I made a batch. But your grandma's toffee squares or toffee bars are so delectable. Yeah. If I'm going with like classic like things that I've eaten since I was a child, peanut butter blossoms. They're so
Sure.
delicious.
Yeah. Number 3. Do you have a favorite version of A Christmas Carol?
My favorite version is A Muppet Christmas Carol because I told you the puppets. I just love puppets.
Oh, now you like puppets. I see.
No.
A second ago, you said Yoda should be always made on a computer. Maybe if Fozzie Bear had a lightsaber.
Maybe.
All right. Number 4. Is the Nightmare Before Christmas a Christmas movie or a Halloween movie?
I think it's appropriate to watch them at either. However, I would say that I would watch them at Halloween time more than I watch them at Christmas time.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like thematically it feels like a spooky movie.
Yeah, the fact that it's like set in Halloween Town primarily, and like most of the characters are like little creepy characters, makes me draw it a little bit more towards my Halloween time of year than my Christmas time of year. But Christmas is acceptable too if you want to just keep Halloween rolling.
All right, so the next question you already answered, but I'm going to need you to answer your second favorite Rankin Bass Christmas film.
Oh no. Well, Rudolph.
Rudolph?
Yeah, because of Bumble, the abominable
Um,
snowman.
all right, all right. Number 6. Star Wars Holiday Special 1978. Have you seen it?
Yes, I have seen it. I have seen it with you. And all I gotta say is, yo, the baby Wookiee.
Enough said. Number 7. Your favorite ornament on our Christmas tree?
Well, I'm looking at a Christmas tree
You can name a
right
few if you want.
now.
You have trouble naming
Oh
just one.
boy. Yeah, this is actually really hard. I really enjoy we have this set of ornaments that we bought at the Providence Flea Market from these really sweet folks who are part of the Ornament Rescue League, which is like a really cute name and like a really cute idea. This kind of goes in line with Rudolph being one of my favorite films for Christmas, is that they take these, I guess, misfit ornaments, like ornaments that people don't want anymore, and they breathe new life into them by recrafting them. So we have like something that used to just be like this simple kind of like worn out teddy bear that now like sits with an ornament and a candy cane and it has a hat on it. They just kind of breathe new life into ornaments. So I really appreciate the set of 3 that we have of those. They also donate all their proceeds to Hasbro Children's Hospital, which I think is a really important cause. It's a fantastic facility for kids who need healthcare, especially like extended healthcare. They take really good care of their patients and their patients' families so that they can stay nearby while their kids are in the hospital. Aside from that, we have a set of like tiny little Ewoks. And I really like those too, even though they're so tiny, like they're little guys. So I do like those, and our Space Santa in a rocket. We had a snafu where it fell from the tree the year that we got it and it broke, but we were able to get another one. So I'm really glad for that. He's really cool Santa. We have a lot of like cool Santa guys that I enjoy.
Seems appropriate for the time of year.
Oh yeah, Space Santa?
No, just Santa in general.
Oh, I thought you meant like space Santa. I'm like, yeah, I love space this time of year.
Favorite Christmas album or artist?
Oh dear. I gotta go with Dolly Parton.
Very nice. Number 9, your favorite holiday candy.
Favorite holiday candy? I think this is really hard. Like I said earlier, I really love candy and sweets. I like the Reese's peanut butter trees, which they just call shapes now because people said they don't look like trees. And I also like this time of year is when you get people gift you with like the Ferrero Rocher, the Lindt truffles, and I really like that sort of stuff too. Basically, I go chocolate heavy in the Christmas time.
Okay, and the final question is a favorite Christmas. So that's a year, memory, or gift. Like, what is a standout moment for you in your entire life?
I think it would have to be the year that my parents got me my Fisher Price like kitchen set that came with like a sink and a refrigerator and a stove and an
Yeah.
oven. That was like super memorable to me. I think that was also the same year that they got my little brother, who's 3 years younger than me, a like a push pedal car. And those two toys, like we wore those out, both of them. We would like be in our Barney crew neck sweaters, like they were like crispy white crew necks with Barney on them, and we'd be playing in the kitchen, and then we would go outside, and we would like, okay, y'all have seen Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift. I don't want to say we invented Tokyo drifting, but it was like north side of Milwaukee drifting to us because we did things with that push pedal car I didn't know was possible. It was like a little race car. It's hard to explain. I wish I had actually I do have a picture of it. I'm pretty sure on Facebook of my little brother Robert, and he's like giving it a car wash on the driveway. So I'll show it to you.
Robert. Shout out to Robert.
Yeah, shout out to my little brother Robert. Merry Christmas, little bro.
All right. Before we wrap this up, where can people check out the latest episodes of the Wrestling Public Radio podcast?
Wrestling Public Radio can be found on all streaming platforms. If you listen to your podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, honestly, wherever you want to listen to a podcast, I got you. If you don't listen to your podcast anywhere, you can start listening to podcasts on any of those platforms, or just Anchor if you don't want to download an app. And you can find me on social media as well. I like to live tweet wrestling events, say sassy things on Twitter at WPR Media. I also am on Instagram posting random pictures all the time, and Facebook as well, and videos. And those are both Wrestling Public Radio.
Excellent. Remember, this episode was streamed today live on YouTube. Our listeners can always join in our conversation, submit questions, interact with us. And the audio only version will hit the podcast platforms the following Monday every week. So on Spotify, Apple Podcast app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, pretty much all the same places that you can find Wrestling Public Radio.
Oh, interesting. You could listen to both at the same time. Well, not the same time, but
at
like
the same time, one headphone in each ear with two different devices, and listen on double speed because you consume more that way, like I do.
Okay, it's time to go now.
Crystal, thank you for being a part of today's Gremlins Gremlins 2, the new batch double feature episode. Everyone have a safe and joyous holidays. We'll be catching you all in the new year. Lots of exciting plans for Collect and Destroy in 2021. Our first episode back in January we will be talking all things The Witcher Season 1. Crystal, Nate Failhour, myself, going through episode by episode, talking about our favorites. Merry Christmas.
Thank you so much for
And
having me.
good night.